Hi Prep 2, this is the rest of your story, Jane Eyre. This is part 7. Jane left to visit Mrs. Reed when she sent her a letter telling her that she was dying. And she informed her that she had an uncle, a rich uncle called John. He left her a lot of money. Then Mrs. Reed died. So Jane returned back to Thornfield Hall, and on the way she was thinking if Mr. Rochester had already got married to Miss Blanche Ingram or not yet. She saw him in the garden as soon as she returned. Page 19. "Are you happy here, Jane?" he asked. "Yes, I am very happy," I answered. "And you like Adele and Mrs. Fairfax?" "Very much," I said. "You will be sad to leave them," he said. I looked away. Now he is going to tell me that I must leave because he is going to be married, I thought. I looked at him. "Yes," I answered. "I will be very sad to leave. Mr. Rochester here is testing Jane's feelings. He wants to know if she loves him or not." "But you must leave, you know," Mr. Rochester said. "Must I? Must I leave soon?" "Yes, soon." "Then you are going to get married." "Yes, I am going to get married." "Adele must go to school, and you must get a new job. I will find you one, far from here." "Far from here?" I asked. "But then I never see Thornfield Hall again, and I never see you again, Mr. Rochester." "Oh, when you are far from here, you will soon forget me," he said. "As I told you, what is Mr. Rochester doing here? He is testing Jane Eyre's feelings towards him. He wants to know if she loves him or not." "No," I thought. "You will forget me perhaps, but I will never forget you." "Never," I answered him at last, and I started to cry. I could not speak. He watched me carefully. Then at last he spoke again. "Perhaps you do not need to go," he said. "Perhaps you can stay here when I am married." Did Mr. Rochester think that I had no feelings? Did he not understand how I felt? Were my feelings so unimportant? I now felt angry. At this moment, Jane Eyre felt so miserable and so furious that Mr. Rochester was pushing her in order to test her feelings, whether she would be happy if he got married to Blanche Ingram and she had to leave or not. "No," I told him, "I could never stay. I will not stay. Miss Ingram will be your wife. I know that I am not rich and beautiful like Miss Ingram. I am poor and unimportant. Miss Blanche Ingram is the lady that went to visit Thornfield Hall with the rest of the visitors. She was young, rich, and beautiful." So Jane Eyre thought that Mr. Rochester would marry her. Page 20. "But I can still feel sadness, and if you marry Miss Ingram, I must leave here." Mr. Rochester looked at me, and then he smiled. "I don't want you to go, Jane, and I'm not going to marry Miss Ingram. Don't get excited. I want you to stay here. It's you I want to marry." At last, Mr. Rochester confessed his love to Jane Eyre. He told her that he didn't want to marry anyone. He wanted to marry her. I could not believe him. Now you are laughing at me, I said. No, I am not, he answered. I want you to marry me, Jane. Will you marry me? Okay, يبقى who said this sentence? Mr. Rochester. He said it to Jane Eyre in the garden at Thornfield Hall. He was testing her feelings to check and to make sure if she loves him or not. But Jane was confused because when she made a comparison between herself and Miss Blanche Ingram, there was a lot of differences. Miss Blanche Ingram was rich, young, and very beautiful, elegant, but Jane was poor, had no relatives, and unimportant. He looked at me seriously. That at last I did believe him. Mr. Rochester wanted to marry me. He wanted me to be his wife. So Jane Eyre was so glad. Page 21. Yes, I will marry you, I answered. I will make you happy, Jane, he said. No one will stop us. He continued with a strange, half-sad look. Here, strange, half-sad look. As we said before, there is a suspense in the novel. There are a lot of things and a lot of secrets unfolded. Okay, we don't know about them. So here, Mr. Rochester, his face was strange and half-sad look. I could not understand that look, but I was too happy to be worried about it. It grew dark. The wind began to blow and it started to rain. So we walked together back to the house. My wedding day was only a month later. 2 nights before the wedding, I was in bed asleep. My wedding dress was in the room. It was a windy night. The wind made a strange sound. Suddenly, I woke up. There was a light in the room. I thought it was morning, but it was still dark outside. Someone was in my room. Take care. We don't know the person, only someone. We don't know who is this lady or man. Someone entered Jane's room. Was it Mrs. Fairfax? Was it Grace Poole? It was neither of them. It was a woman, but I did not know her. As I told you, there is a lot of suspense in the story. For here, at the beginning, Jane heard voice laughing as if an animal is screaming or an angry animal. This time, she saw a strange woman inside her room. We take care. The weather was windy. Night, it means it was dark. So Jane didn't recognize this woman so much. She was a big woman. Here Jane Eyre is describing that woman. She was a big woman, tall and strong. Her black hair was long and thick. Her clothes were long and white. At first, I did not see her face. She took my dress, the wedding dress. It was on a chair. She took it and held it in front of her. She looked at herself in the mirror, then I saw her face. It was the most terrible face. The woman's eyes were large and red, and her face was purple. She looked angry, cruel, and frightening. How did that strange woman look? The strange woman who entered Jane Eyre's room at night and took her wedding dress. She looked angry, cruel, and at the same time frightening. Then she took my dress and angrily tore it to pieces. She threw the pieces of the dress on the floor. Next, she went to the window and looked out. Then she started to come towards my bed. I was so frightened that I could not move. Here Jane Eyre, as if she was paralyzed. She couldn't move. She couldn't even scream. She was so frightening of that strange woman. I could not scream for help. I lay still in bed. Is she going to kill me? I thought, but suddenly the light disappeared and the room went dark. This means that that woman took the wedding dress, Jane's wedding dress, then she tore it into pieces, threw the pieces on the floor, then she left. But suddenly the light disappeared and the room went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. The sun was shining. At once I remembered that strange and frightening woman. Did it all really happen, or was it a dream? Jane, when she woke up, she thought it was a nightmare at the beginning. Then I saw my wedding dress. Page 22. It was lying on the floor, torn to pieces. I picked up the pieces of the dress, so it was all true. That terrible woman was real. So it was not a nightmare, as Jane thought at the beginning. It was real. As Jane Eyre saw her wedding dress torn into pieces on the floor. Who was that strange woman? Why did she do that? Up till now, we don't know. All this is secret. As I told you, we still have suspense in the story. When I told Mr. Rochester about the woman and showed him my dress, he looked very worried and was silent for a long time. This means that Mr. Rochester is the only one who knows what's going on at Thornfield Hall. Jane, I think you had a bad dream. Bad dream means a nightmare. This was his reply to Jane, that it was only a nightmare. But the dress was torn already. He said at last, I think it was perhaps Grace Poole who really tore your dress, but in your dream it was some stranger. He told her that maybe this is the servant who called Grace Poole. I was not sure about this, but I said nothing. That night, the night before the wedding, I slept in Adele's room. Jane was so frightened, so the next day, she slept in Adele's room. My wedding day came, and we went to that church. Page 23. But we are going to see what is going to happen in the church. Page 23. But the wedding did not happen. We're going to see why. Why didn't Mr. Rochester and Jane get married? In the church, while the clergyman was speaking, someone threw open the doors at the back and shouted, Stop the wedding. Mr. Rochester cannot get married. Why? Who can prevent them from marriage, and who opened the door in the church? He has got a wife already. He is married to my sister. Who is this man who is saying so? Well, Mr. Rochester was already married. We didn't know who is this wife. Was it Blanche Ingram? Was it Grace Poole? Who? Everybody in the church turned round to see the speaker. It was Mr. Mason, the man from the West Indies. Do you remember Mr. Mason, the one who visited Mr. Rochester? Then he was hurt and left again. But who was his sister? How could Mr. Rochester be married? I could not believe it. My heart turned to ice. I looked at Mr. Rochester. Here Jane Eyre looked at Rochester's face. She is waiting for answers. Are you already married? Why didn't you tell me? And so on. My heart turned to ice. I looked at Mr. Rochester. His face was white and hard. But he did not say that Mr. Mason was mistaken. Mr. Rochester was shocked that all the people had already known what was going on at Thornfield Hall. But where is Mr. Rochester's wife, your sister? The clergyman asked Mr. Mason. Where does she live? She lives at Thornfield Hall, answered Mr. Mason. She is still alive. I saw her there last April. We as readers and Jane Eyre didn't know who was Mr. Rochester's wife or where did she live. But this is the first time for us to know. This means that the secret, the suspense in the story is going to be uncovered, okay? We readers and Jane are going to know what was happening. At Thornfield Hall, the clergyman said, but I know of no Mrs. Rochester at Thornfield Hall. There must be some mistake. Mr. Rochester was silent for a long time. I can explain, he said at last. I'll tell you everything. It is true. My wife is living at Thornfield Hall. Here Mr. Rochester started to clarify the suspense in the story. He wants to defend himself in order not to become a liar or dishonest. So he said that it's true, he was already married. I can explain, he said at last. I'll tell you everything. It is true. My wife is living at Thornfield Hall. We got married 15 years ago in the West Indies when I was a young man. My wife's name was Bertha Mason. She is Mason's sister. Soon after the wedding, Bertha became very strange. Slowly, she became mad and dangerous. He means that she became crazy, mad. She wanted to kill me, and she tried to kill anybody who came near her. Last April, she tried to kill her brother, Mr. Mason. Was that what happened? When Mr. Mason went to the attic and he screamed, then we found blood on his body. Nobody knows about Bertha. Nobody knows that she is my wife. This young lady, Jane Eyre, knows nothing about her. Mr. Rochester is speaking in the church. He wants to defend himself and Jane. He said that Jane didn't know anything about that. That's why she accepted the marriage. A nurse, Grace Poole, looks after Bertha. Mr. Rochester's face was dark and serious. Come with me, he said. Now I will take you all to see her. As I told you, Mr. Rochester wants to defend himself in front of all people, especially Jane Eyre. He took them to see his wife at the attic at Thornfield Hall. We all left the church. Without speaking, we returned to Thornfield Hall. When we got there, Mr. Rochester took us up to the attic. He took out a key and unlocked the door. This means that he locked his wife with the keys. Grace Poole was there, and in the room with her there was a frightening woman. Okay, I will stop till here. As I told you, the suspense is already uncovered. Jane and us readers have known what was going on, that Mr. Rochester can't marry Jane Eyre because he is already married to a mad wife from the West Indians. It was Mr. Mason's sister, and it is illegal to marry another woman because he has another wife. Okay, that's why the marriage they couldn't get married. Thank you so much for listening.